Good evening, friends. The operational situation at the front by the end of February 14th. We will start with you, according to the tradition of the Skopinski-Lemensky section of the front, specifically from the Lemensky direction. Turny Yampolovka, about active military operations continue, and today, there was a lot of information from this section of the front. During the day, there was a lot of disinformation too. Well, let's analyze in a little more detail what is happening now. First of all, there is a news background that Russian troops are preparing to increase pressure in general on the Kapysko-Lemensky sector of the front and the matchmaking direction, including Kapyski. There are such moments. This is all primarily due, of course, to the concentration of their troops in the Belgorod region. And naturally, the probability that they may strike in the near future is quite high. But we proceed from what we have today. Let's talk about it. Because they may or may not, they will definitely increase pressure, because the war does not end tomorrow, and you should understand that naturally. The frequency of such attacks, it will be observed from the enemy. Now, as for the Thorns and the Yampolovka, there were reports that it was necessary to capture Turny Torskaya before the Iterna. So, there were reports that pressure was increasing, including on Torsko. Why am I talking? Because footage was published from the drones of the armed forces of Ukraine, where, first of all, fire damage was inflicted, and secondly, the movement of the enemy, that is Russian troops, including tracked vehicles, was recorded. What does this mean? First of all, about what further attempts will be made in the near future to improve the tactical situation. However, based on the vector of their attacks, and the concentration of forces where they are currently conducting, they will try to strike in the neighboring area, not too far away, but in the direction of the Yar Dalny Yampolovka itself. If they attacked the near Yar before, now there will be a far Yar, and at the same time, there may be strikes from the area of the Laptev Yar in the southern direction, that is, on the near Yar. Try not to enter the Yar itself from the southeast, but from the north. Therefore, active hostilities continue. We do not record any new changes, but the activity is high enough for fighting in this sector of the front. I think I answered your questions that were asked in this direction. Moving on, the Bakhmut direction. Active hostilities are still continuing. The high rate of fighting continues both north and east of Ivanovo. Today, there were a number of reports, naturally very loud, that Russian troops had also gained a foothold on the eastern outskirts of Ivanovo, and that they had been driven back. Well, we discussed this moment with you on the daytime broadcast. So according to the geolinking from the drone, the frame from the drone also discussed this moment. They really reached one of the points. They failed to gain a foothold in the end, retreated to their original positions. But, at the same time, we talked about the situation from yesterday to today. If you missed the daytime broadcast, you can briefly watch this moment. So today, there are new reports that further attempts are naturally being made, but these are small infantry groups. At the same time, we will not focus so much on the east of Ivanovo as on the north. Because, most likely, they will increase the pressure from the north very seriously. Why? Because, of course, there is the concept of enemy defensive structures. Also, the drones are working. He sees the situation perfectly. And according to the reports coming from the Russian side, from their information field, they are considering the north of Ivanovo for the main attack on the settlement itself, because it is less ready to repel such a massive assault by Russian troops. But this, as they say, we will look at, because I have confidence that we are just ready for such a development of events, and naturally looked at such an option, that they can shift the main blow, not to Bogdanovka, not to Chaz Yar, but to Ivanovsko. That is, the attack vector will change. This has been considered, and we are ready for it. Therefore, active hostilities continue. The pressure of the enemy is now aimed at taking the maximum positions in the landings, where possible, to gain a foothold. To take a number of support points north of Ivanovskoye, and then try to strike from two directions with large forces. To date, in the evening, by the end of the day, we do not fix any changes, everything remains within the gray zone. We are moving to the Avdeevka direction. It remains very, very heavy for us. There were a lot of messages during the day. I have already told you on previous broadcasts that it is better to wait with information, it is better to submit it a little later, but at least reliable, because a lot of different information will come, as well as from our side, including disinformation information. And about what was discarded, there was information during the day about stabilization, and so on, and so on. But by the evening, we sum up that the enemy has advanced again. And he advanced, let's say, a little unexpectedly for me, in any case, by the trap of Avdeevka itself. Let's look at the situation. So, on a front section up to 620 meters wide, the enemy managed to advance to a depth of 500 meters and take control of one of the forest belts. So, the situation by the end of the day looks like this. What does this mean? They understand as much as possible now, first of all, that the log complex, which is one of the targets where we have an intersection about 0542 Industrial Avenue, is extremely difficult to approach. So they are making further attempts to move, so to speak, around, as far as possible through the fields, along the forest belts. And one of the forest belts of the gas station traps has come under the control of the enemy, and now he is attacking in the direction of the log, from several directions. Not only from the southeast, but also from south to north, there are also attacks. At the same time, from the east, there is pressure from the enemy, in the direction of Avdeevka, as Sohim, and the development that is located on its outskirts. Active hostilities continue with varying success, and at the same time, further information is received that they are transferring additional forces, naturally reserves, to the settlement of Avdeevka itself, to its northern part, to low-rise buildings to the private sector, and accordingly, they are preparing for more large-scale assault operations. It means that they continue fighting, if we speak for the northern part of the city, along the alley of the 50th anniversary of Avdeevka, as Sohim, and also along several streets, namely Pershatrevneva, Stepnaya, and Independence. Well, or let's say conditionally, between the quarry and the center of private development, that is, there is quite high pressure from the enemy in this area. Naturally, he uses the north among other things, in order to maximize his presence, but at the same time prepare for more large-scale offensive actions. It is also necessary to note a very important point, that most likely the attacks will be from the forest belt, based on the fact that there is a total of information today, yes, not only in the north direction, in the direction of the log complex, but they will obviously try to strike even further south. Why? Because it will serve them, that they will take both unpaved and part of unpaved roads, under the control of Avdeevka logistics supply. Therefore, this area is extremely important for them, and they also consider it based on the vector of their latest attacks. Therefore, the situation is very difficult, let's be blunt. As for the eastern flank, without any changes. Russian troops also attempted to improve the tactical situation here, but managed to repel most of the attacks. Although, it should also be understood, that, if there is a chance, that they will be able to take all of Avdeevka into the ring, of course, there will be a withdrawal and loss of positions of eastern Avdeevka. But we say this for the most pessimistic, worst-case scenario. Moving on. South of Avdeevka. In principle, we talked about where the enemy is attacking, where it is aimed. It aims to bypass the fortified area and Zenith, the Chebarashka fortified area, respectively. From its experimental vector so to one of the forest belts, what we analyzed yesterday with you, and today briefly on the previous broadcast, to one of the forest belts that leads to the Vineyards to Garden Association. He is also an agrochemist. At the same time, in the Garden Association itself, fighting also continues in this area, high intensity on the part of the FAU. Of course, counterattacks are also being undertaken, but the main idea of the enemy is to bypass the fortified areas. Well, let's make changes. This means that the enemy is advancing on a front section, up to 320 meters wide, to a depth of 550 meters. One of the intersections came under his control. Well, now, the assault actions by the Russian troops are continuing, both from the intersection area, in the western, and in the eastern direction, that is, here from two directions, in order to stabilize the flanking positions in the west, and the eastern one in the direction of the Garden Partnership. And again, there are also intense fighting in the Garden Association. Therefore, the enemy's mindset is clear. We will be watching for further developments. There are a lot of comments coming in about what kind of situation can develop in the near future. I will tell you that it is very difficult to foresee the situation here. Although if it was clear with the south, and he gave forecasts there, how can they do vectors, so to speak, in the north? Well, I underestimated. Although, I am very often criticized for being quite pessimistic about how the fighting can develop. Yes, and I exaggerate too much. I overestimate the Russian army. But again, as in the Bakhmut direction of the Popovsky forest, so here I underestimate them. In fact, I say, because well, they really use very large forces, and have partial success west of Avdeevka itself. Therefore, for my part, I will not give any forecasts yet, because the situation is very difficult. And at the same time, I will note one more very important point, and move on. This is a water experimental site. So, in the last few days, shots were received, that is, here we observed absolute positionality, for about a month, and we can say for 2.5 months, yes, that is, there were attacks without significant changes, then absolute opposition. And in recent days, there has also been activity, so it means that between the water and the experienced, but it's northeast and northwest. Let's talk. I mean, what could be? The enemy may make attempts on this sector of the front, to try to advance to the intersections along the forest belts, in order to worsen logistics as much as possible. Well, this is based on the vector of attacks, firstly, in the northern part of Avdeevka, and secondly, from where he is currently showing the greatest activity. Therefore, this is the situation we have in the Avdeevka sector of the front. In short, very, very complicated. For Avdeevsky, as Sahim was also asked to comment, I will only add here, as already in the form of a remark. So, on Avdeevsky himself, as a Sahim, are there any assault actions? Yes, there are, but they are positional in nature. From the area of the Avdeevka landfill, they attacked in the southwestern and western directions. But this is more, I would say, not only positional, but also distracting. These attacks are in order to disperse our forces as much as possible. Despite the fact that today is another day, when our fighters from the field wrote about the number of strikes with bombs, fabs, cabs of 501.5. That is, there are a lot of messages. Naturally, you must understand that, to conduct military operations at, well, it's extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. Plus, they have pulled up a fairly significant amount of barrel and rocket artillery to this section of the front, and are naturally working. Therefore, the situation is very, very difficult. But on the part of the APU, all necessary measures are also being taken, as far as possible, including for stabilization, not only for counterattacks. Therefore, a chemist arrives at the plant, arrives at Avdeevka, and also arrives at the 9th Quarter District. Very, very difficult. Moving on. Kurikovsky direction. We do not record any significant changes, despite the fact that I published in my telegram. It means that we discussed on the daytime broadcast, where Russian troops approached one of the T-shaped intersections. But there was a fire defeat and eventually retreated to their original position. But nevertheless, the activity is quite high, both on the site in the direction of the abandoned field reservoir, and in the area of the Harvest Garden Association, in the direction of Georgievka itself. That is, taking a number of positions in the eastern part. It is probably even more correct to take the northeastern part of the settlement, that is, north of the Georgievsky Rate. Naturally, the enemy is now firing, including mortars, at the Garden Association, located south of the Georgievsky Stavka, which naturally creates more serious pressure than it was before, therefore it is now making attempts to advance on this sector of the front. The situation remains under clarification, there are active battles. We do not fix any new changes after the victory. I will comment on the positional nature of the fighting and on Novomikhailovka. So, let's start right away with clarifications. Have been added. I repeat, this is more clarification, and not the enemy's advance south of Novomikhailovka. We said just at the previous broadcast that Russian troops are attacking, but not only from the east and southeast, there is also some activity to the south, in the direction of the same cemetery and industrial zone, as well as farms conditionally. Therefore, by the evening, this is about the situation we have, but this is more of a clarification on the previous period. But in any case, yes, the enemy is increasing pressure on this sector of the front as well. Here, just the same Russian troops are facing with airborne drones, with a huge number of problems, in fact, including 155th Russian Marines, recorded a video, Butusev published it. They complain that the APU is very seriously holding the defense, despite the fact that, well, the situation really should have been much worse in the forest. But due to the fact that the distance has been reduced as much as possible here, the efficiency of the Vividrons has increased significantly, and the Russian RAP systems that work, they have a number of problems. Well, we have already said with you once that they are not as effective as they are claimed to be. Actually, this is normal. We also cannot say that everything works perfectly. There is something to work on. We need to say it more objectively. But in any case, the APU manages to restrain somewhere, counterattack somewhere, but you need to understand that the enemy is involved, firstly, combat-ready brigades, and secondly, numerically superior not only in manpower, but also in terms of artillery and of course tactical aviation, which works on the sector of the front. As for the battles, has the vector of attacks changed? Where are they happening now? They occur along the street, including Timoryazov, in the direction of just the same conditional road to the cemetery. The intersection of the leading road to the cemetery. It means that Russian troops were trying to advance. This can be attributed to attacks from the southeast. And there are also attempts to break through along several streets, but mainly, approximately, we will say approximately, in this area. This is from the information that was received on the evening of the 14th of February today. Therefore, we continue active hostilities in this sector of the front. At the same time, there are also attacks, I repeat, north of Novomikhailovka, but here the situation remains for further clarification, because a lot of misinformation actually comes short on clarification. In the Orekhovsky, Veliko-Novoselkovsky directions, and to the markets without any changes. And I will comment on one more point. Today, it means that our military reported in one of the broadcasts that the enemy, Russian troops, are preparing for offensive actions on the Zaporozhye sector of the front, and most likely this is the Orkhov direction. In fact, I'm just probably going to supplement what I said before about working on. Yes, this is really the Orkhov direction. They, as you remember, had a plan to bypass the work in the direction of the beam, that is, northeast of the settlement of Kapani, and west of Verbovoy, to advance to the beam, and in this way cut off the work, well, that is, force the APU to retreat, so as not to be surrounded. Yes, they had such a plan. Then, the enemy managed to advance somewhere. Subsequently, the APU counterattacked in a number of areas, and even stabilized the situation somewhere. Parity was achieved on the battlefield. But yes, there really is such information that they will try again, because, well, it is extremely important for them, including not only in order to align here, conditionally we will speak along the Surovikin line and a little higher, yes, some of them will be restored from it through minefields, but the media component is also working, it's loud enough, let's be blunt. It is impossible to underestimate what effect it can make returns through the information space. That is, if the enemy manages to capture and restore some of the positions, let's talk not only about the work to capture, but also to restore to the north, where he already had control, that is, along the Uspinovskaya beam. Therefore, but most likely, all of this can be really considered only after Avdeevka, I would say so. Because now they are pulling together really combat-ready brigades, combat-ready units, Russian troops are transferring combat-ready forces. Among other things, there was information that they were transferred from the Kremen direction, and to the Kremen direction, to the city of Kremen, they were transferred from the Belgorod region, from the Pulaski district. That is, initially for the storming of the Yampilev turnpike, but then Avdeevka became a more important direction for them. Therefore, until they resolve the issue with Avdeevka, what will happen there as a result? Yes, it makes no sense to talk about the Orekhovsky direction, despite the fact that they have superiority in personnel, artillery, ammunition, because they understand that the situation clearly will not go according to plan. Because already how many such attempts they had and managed to repel very serious attacks on the same Novomikhailivka, and so on, and so on. Sinkovka is an example of this, since April of that year, where positions were taken north of Sinkovka, and it was possible to expand minimally through the forest northwest and west of Sinkovka. Therefore, they understand perfectly well that until they close the issue with Avdeevka, it makes no sense to start something large-scale. But this is again my opinion. As it will be, we will see. Because, as practice has shown, I underestimate the opponent lately. Well, I think that in this case, I spoke objectively. Until tomorrow's broadcast, be healthy.